The story begins with a sequence of images depicting supernatural creatures and a man dragging himself into his office. Then the scene shifts to his home where he was calmly watering his plants, drinking coffee, and at one point during the day watching a television show about a boy of ice who accesses his status menu. Shortly after, while holding a tablet and browsing an online store, he is mysteriously transported to a forest of gigantic trees, where a strange little green girl appears near him. My friends, up to this point, this is absolutely crazy, and I confess I'm finding it quite thrilling. So let's move forward. As soon as she disappears without a trace, the man, terrified, runs through the forest and comes across the skeleton of a warrior with a sword stuck in its chest. Imitating the boy from the television named Kai, he repeats the action he saw and orders the status menu to open. At that moment, a menu appears displaying his information. Kenichi Hamada, 38 years old, along with Shangri-La and item box. Thinking he has ended up in a world similar to Kai's, Kenichi wonders where his HP, MP skills and magic are. Clicking on Shangri-La, he accesses the online store where he usually shops. Then he opens the item box, but since it's empty, he puts some grass inside to test it before discarding it, and enchanted, he comments that being in another world is simply amazing. To further enjoy his experience, he tries to buy food through the menu but realizes he doesn't have enough credit. He even tries to sell the grass he collected to see if he can exchange it for food, but of course, the item has no value, frustrating him once again. However, as he looks around, he notices a sword in the remains of a warrior and trades it for food. After eating, he also buys a shovel and buries the warrior out of respect, since the warrior indirectly saved Kenichi's skin. And now, with the money from the sword, he buys a bicycle, leather work boots, a sports towel, a compass, and a monocle. Riding the bicycle, he thinks he needs to find a settlement to earn some cash to survive. Later, we see our protagonist preparing a meal using a pot, a stove, and other utensils. Taking advantage of his prior knowledge, Kenichi uses the money he earned to buy items and resell them at a higher price. Up to that point, he was doing very well in this world and was enjoying his adventurous stay. But trouble was on the horizon, folks. While the protagonist was enjoying his meal, several suspicious-looking wolves appeared nearby. Panicking, Kenichi searches for something in the store to defend himself. The first thing he sees is a bow and arrow, but since he's never used that weapon before, he dismisses the idea. Then he finds some rockets for sale and decides to pretend it's New Year's to see if the dogs in this world get scared. However, although the wolves retreat a bit, they simply decide not to give up on turning our protagonist into barbecue and remain nearby. Not wanting to fall behind, Kenichi buys a slingshot and shoots at the wolves several times. This time the wolves finally flee, allowing Kenichi to escape as quickly as possible on his bicycle, venturing deeper into the forest by late afternoon. At dawn, we see that he's exhausted after such an intense escape, and getting up, he wonders if he has reached the edge of the forest. To check, he buys a ladder and upon climbing it, spots a city protected by walls. Well, now he believes he will be safe since he'll be able to earn money and protect himself. With that in mind, he buys black pepper and a leather bag to try his luck within the walls. On the way, Kenichi is almost run over by a young man driving a cart and is surprised to hear him speaking Japanese, indicating that communication with the locals is possible. The cart driver offers him a ride to Dahlia, assuming that's his destination. At this point, he introduces himself as Fuyu, a merchant. Inside the cart, there is a woman whom Fuyu introduces as a traveling bard and his companion. After Kenichi says his name, the merchant comments on the man's strange clothes and unusual name, asking about his intentions in Dahlia. Kenichi says he wants to do business, but Fuyu notices that he has no luggage, which leads him to suspect that Kenichi has an item box. The bard then conjures her bandolin and plays a song about the fine rain that brought the man and the wind and rain in his journey's wake, and that his journey will begin from there. Sometime later, when they arrive in Dahlia, Kenichi helps Fuyu unload some boxes. In gratitude for the ride, he gives the merchant some black pepper. Fuyu wonders why he wants to sell such a dangerous item since the spy syndicate known as Bacopa holds a monopoly in the region and this pepper falls under that. He says that if those guys see Kenichi selling this spice, he will certainly have trouble. However, since it's a personal gift, Fuyu insists on paying, as according to him, local merchants love to buy things cheaply but never accept anything for free. With that, he gives Kenichi some strange coins and leaves. Kenichi examines the coins in the item box and sees that they are 1 copper coin, 1 square silver coin, and another silver coin. Since the value of these coins is described, he calculates that he has 108,311 yen. Wow, the guy made a fortune with just a handful of pepper. In the late afternoon, he goes to a tavern where a girl greets him, claiming it's the best in Dahlia. Kenichi informs her that he has come to stay, so the girl charges 1 copper coin for lodging or a small square silver coin for 2 meals. Since he only wanted lodging, the visitor pays the copper coin, but when he needs to sign his name on the tavern's list, he remembers that he doesn't know how to write in the local language. The girl notices his strange clothes and asks if he's looking for an intermediary. Actually, Kenichi tells her that he intends to do business on his own, but she explains that the Merchants Guild won't register someone who doesn't know how to read, write, and calculate. The man corrects her, saying he knows how to do those things, but perhaps not according to the local culture. At this point, the receptionist asks him to imagine that she has 4 bags containing 12 rinkas each, and asks how many rinkas she has in total. It would be funny if he answered that he would only know the answer if he were using apples. However, he correctly answers 48, and the girl is impressed by the mathematical talent of the genius before her. Then she asks for his name to write on the paper and introduces herself as Azalea. Kenichi asks her to teach him the local language in exchange for some snacks from another country as a reward, and the woman doesn't hesitate and accepts the offer. After savoring the sweets he gave her, she is so delighted that she makes a point of mentioning that there's nothing like them in the kingdom of Kadan. Fulfilling her part of the deal, Azalea teaches the foreigner the native language of Kadan, and he discovers that it's not so different from Japanese, with the numbers using the same decimal system and the digits being treated the same way as Arabic numerals. While posing for a drawing and seeing how quickly the man learned to read and write, Azalea imagines that he will soon become a great merchant and considers becoming his lover. Wow, folks, look at these ideas. However, Kenichi thinks she should avoid an old man like him, especially since he's old enough to be her father. But from the look in the girl's eyes, I don't think she thought of it that way. Sometime later, Kenichi finishes the drawing, leaving Azalea enchanted, feeling like a noble woman for having been portrayed. She then hugs the man affectionately, emphasizing that he gave her sweets and made her portrait, and with that, she takes him somewhere and turns off the lights in the room. I don't need to say anything else. The next morning, Kenichi, probably feeling very much at peace, goes to the guild to register, and the receptionist asks him to fill out a form. Noticing that the papers were handwritten, Kenichi deduces that they haven't discovered printing yet. After filling out the paperwork, he is informed that the registration fee is a whopping 50,000 yen, and our protagonist laments the absurd amount, wondering if he could pay in installments. The guild lady says that's possible, and then she hands the foreigner a guild identification card. She mentions that he must keep this identification visible when doing business, which is why Fuyu also carried one. After leaving the guild, he walks through the Dahlia market and observes that 2 slightly brown sheets of paper cost 1 copper coin, a simple dish costs 1 small square silver coin, and a low-quality knife costs 1 silver coin, which he considers expensive. Suddenly, a girl approaches Kenichi and offers 10 tricolored fruits for 1 copper coin. Wanting to try different types, he takes several and puts them in a bag. Although he has no idea what kind of fruits they are, to find out, he stores the foods where their names are written. The fruits are called Rinyo, Rinzu, and Rinka, the latter being the one Kenichi gave to Azalea when he returned to the tavern, in honor of the 4-basket calculation from earlier. The girl was extremely happy with the gift, as she loved that food. When Kenichi returned to his room, he spent some time analyzing his identification before falling asleep. At dawn, he surprised Azalea by demonstrating his carpentry skills, setting up a sales booth by himself. Additionally, the woman noticed the clips he was using and commented that hers were very weak, expressing interest in buying the ones he had, which made Kenichi see a profitable opportunity with this product. Later, he went to a spot on the street to summon his booth, which was stored in his item box. A merchant from the booth next door took a look at the foreigner's products and showed interest in the clips. Kenichi informed her that they cost 1 copper coin for 5 units, so she bought that amount and introduced herself as Anima. As the hours passed, no one visited their booths, and Kenichi began to get bored. However, as a bit more time passed, some people started showing curiosity about the items he was selling. His booth, mainly because of the clips, attracted more customers on the first day. Anima commented that the clips were selling well and thanked Kenichi for bringing customers to her booth as well. Grateful for the recognition, he realized he had made a profit of 15,000 yen. Perhaps it would be possible to live just by selling these clips, but it was likely that imitators offering similar products would soon appear. At that moment, a well-dressed man with a sword at his waist appeared at the booth, and Kenichi suspected he was someone of high status. The man asked to see a knife, and after testing its sharpness, asked the price. Kenichi replied that it cost 2 silver coins. The buyer thought it was expensive, but having never seen such a perfect blade, he understood the value. Then, he asked if the seller had something larger than the knife. Since Kenichi didn't, he checked the menu of his store while reflecting that finding something larger would be difficult. Still, he ended up finding a hunting sword and offered it to the interested party, who was impressed by its beauty. However, upon learning that it cost 1 gold coin, he internally struggled with his desire to acquire it as he considered the price too high. Kenichi wondered if he had charged too much, but he knew he needed to get the most out of those who could pay. In the midst of this, a catwoman approached the booth, sniffed the surroundings, and suddenly licked Kenichi's nose. Then she was hit by 3 beastmen who were discreetly following her. Kenichi was surprised as he had never seen humanoid creatures like those before. Meanwhile, one of the men tore off the tarp that served as the booth's roof and expressed interest in buying it. Kenichi agreed to sell, but when calculating the price for the 3 tarps the buyer wanted, he ended up confusing them, who were probably humans, and they suspected he was trying to cheat them. However, the swordsman assured them that the seller was correct, and embarrassed by their own distrust, the beastmen left with the tarps. And after that, the swordsman decided to buy the sword. After a long day of work, Kenichi paid for 5 nights of lodging. The scene then shifts, and we see a mansion where the maid Margaret showed her lady, named Primula, the clips she had bought. Impressed by the quality of the items, Primula decided to sell them in her store as well. After all, the motto of the Malo Mercantile Company was never to waste an opportunity. Returning to Kenichi, he decided to take a bath before nightfall and thought he wanted to take a hot bath. At that point, he thought about buying a barrel for bathing, filling it with river water, and heating it with fire, but he realized that if he wanted that kind of comfort, he would need to earn more money. Additionally, he wondered how that Shangri-La worked, since the products simply appeared out of nowhere for him. Reflecting on this, the merchant imagined that there must be some trick or scam involved, thinking that maybe even his soul was in danger because of it. However, one thing was certain: there was no way he could figure it out at that moment. The scene then shifts again, and we see a dirty little girl hunting a bird in the forest to eat. She mentions that her greatest desire is to eat until she's full. And while thinking about this, a man shouts the name Anemone, and the girl has to run away. The next day, Kenichi wakes up early again to set up his stall and continue with his plan, and just like him, Anima also repeats this routine with her mat. While our protagonist organizes the necklaces in his show, he reflects that they may not be made of quartz or diamond, but zirconia and polished glass should still be quite valuable in this world, and he thinks it would be great if he could attract a woman's attention with them. Meanwhile, Anama approaches and, upon seeing the neatly arranged accessories, comments that the shopkeeper always has good items in stock and wonders who the supplier is, but Kenichi smiles and replies that it's a trade secret. At that moment, Margaret, the same maid from yesterday, approaches Kenichi in search of 100 clothespins, which impresses the seller. Calculating the money he will earn, he enthusiastically separates the items, while Margaret glances at one of the necklaces on display. She asks if it's made of diamond, and Kenichi informs her that it's made of polished glass. He thinks to himself that it's actually zirconia, but the seller prefers not to mention that. He says the item costs 6 small silver coins, and the woman is surprised by the low price and asks him to reserve the necklace for her. While dismantling the stall to leave, Kenichi is approached by the beast folk from yesterday, and from the look on their faces, it seems like trouble is brewing. Miley sneaks up and catches the scent of spices on the merchant, and upon hearing this, the burly figures beg Kenichi to sell them some spices, although the human has no idea what they're talking about. Anama intervenes and asks the creatures to stop making absurd demands of the market newcomer, as it would be terrible if he ended up on the radar of Bacopa, the spice syndicate. With that, the trio bows to apologize while the onlookers watch the scene and await the outcome, imagining that the newcomer would never go against Bacopa, even if it involves the favorite food of the beast folk. This way, Kenichi understands that he cannot sell spices, but he thinks there's no harm in offering seasoned food. So he will prepare the food just this once, but they will have to eat near the river, on the outskirts of the city. Upon hearing these words, the creatures dance with joy, and Anama asks to join. Not wanting to waste time, the burly figures help dismantle the merchant's stall in seconds and drag him to the mentioned location. There, Kenichi asks his new friend to help him chop some vegetables, and she asks if they are really vegetables due to their color. Kenichi replies that they are from a foreign land but are quite tasty. To vary the menu, the beast folk catch some fish and eagerly await the meal. When it's finally ready, they get excited, and when they taste this type of food prepared by a human for the first time, they simply fall in love with it at the first bite. Anama even comments that they are eating with silver spoons, looking like nobles, but Kenichi mentally corrects her since the utensils are actually made of stainless steel. The creatures point out that a drink would go well with dinner, and Anama asks them to moderate themselves, but Kenichi is more relaxed and remembers that everyone is having fun, so he buys a 4-liter bottle of shashu online. The condition for the creatures to receive the drink is not to tell anyone about this meal, and everyone easily agrees. A little later, talking privately with the man, his fellow merchant asks if he isn't being too generous, but he sees no problem in forgetting reality from time to time. Miley approaches and asks for more drink, and the human takes the opportunity to introduce himself. Similarly, from right to left, the creatures introduce themselves as Nyakero, Nyamelo, and Nyanji. After that, the beast folk dive into the river to digest skillfully, and Kenichi throws a bar of soap so they can take a decent bath. After the bath, the merchant buys beds and warm blankets for everyone to lie on the grass, and everyone passes out right there, while Kenichi admires the sea of stars that enchants the sky with its beauty. When dawn arrives again and the boy returns to the inn, Azalea questions if he spent the night out. Not that she cares, since he paid for the room. Seeing no problem with the intrusion, he says he took a walk with the beast folk near the river, but Azalea replies that he could have stayed with her instead of some beast woman. Kenichi argues that it wasn't just women there, so Azalea hits his clothes and releases a few silky, shiny strands of hair from a beast woman. Later, while starting to set up his stall, the man wonders if Azalea has started to hate him because of this, but the truth is that he prefers not to dwell on it, as the peaceful life he so desires depends much more on his tranquil solitude than on someone who makes things complicated. In the midst of this, Margaret brings her mistress to the foreigner's shop, and then Primula approaches and enchants Kenichi with her extraordinary beauty, likely challenging all the words he had previously thought to himself. After controlling his feelings, he asks if the customer has come to buy the item he reserved for her, and Margaret makes the payment before receiving the necklace and passing it to her mistress. After hearing that the item is made of glass, Primula looks closer and asks if the seller is sure it's not real diamond. Kenichi confirms that it's polished glass, but even so, the woman wishes to see other necklaces, if they are available. Immediately, the shop owner shows more similar items, and Primula is impressed to see that he uses an item box to store them. Seeing everything there, she formally introduces herself to the shopkeeper and asks him to meet her father, the owner of the Mallow Trading Company. Anima mentions that the Mallows are major merchants in Dahlia, and that the company's boss is a kind and beloved man. Listening attentively, Kenichi sees this as his chance to establish contact with a large company. Shortly after accepting the proposal, they go by carriage to Primula's house to finalize the details, where our protagonist comments that he has never traveled in such a luxurious carriage before, and Primula laughs and replies that nobles have even more extravagant carriages. Then she mentions that she hired a craftsman to try to replicate the clothespins Kenichi sells, but the professional ended up failing, as according to him, the metal of the pin may seem simple, but it requires advanced technology to be manufactured. With that, they arrive at a mansion that leaves the man in awe, although Primula insists that it's small compared to a noble's house. Inside, Mallow introduces himself and praises the visitor's manners for doing the same. Kenichi presents the items that captivated the man's daughter, and the company owner himself seems to have fallen in love with them. Primula whispers something in her father's ear, and then he asks Kenichi if he really has an item box. The young seller confirms that he does, although it's small, and the older man mentions that he also has one, and that he used this box to make his company what it is today. In turn, Kenichi shares that he only uses it to store crops, which provokes laughter during the conversation. Speaking of which, the visitor asks why he is there, and Mallow offers Kenichi a position as a supplier for the trading company. The visitor wonders if the magnate can find the right market for these items and sell them at an even greater profit, and Mallow assures him that he can. In that case, Kenichi asks if it wouldn't be easier for the businessman to buy from his shop and resell later. Mallow comments that Kenichi might not like that, and he indeed confesses that he wouldn't. Moreover, Mallow reveals that there's a chance that rivals of the company might make a better offer, and closing a deal would be a way to ensure that doesn't happen. By the way, the businessman makes it clear that he couldn't stand to see any competitor signing an exclusive contract with Kenichi, as that would be the dumbest thing a merchant could do. Additionally, one of the secrets to the great profits of Mallow's trading company is, don't be fooled by the profit in front of you, as you might miss an even better business opportunity. With that said, Mallow offers to split the profits 50-50, and Kenichi accepts the offer. After signing the exclusive contract, Kenichi earned over 500,000 yen with the first products he supplied. Enchanted by the brooch, Primula herself offered 10 gold coins for it, which is equivalent to 2 million yen. Therefore, because of deals like this, Kenichi's balance in Shangri-La had already surpassed 8 digits, so he decided to buy a house. After all, now that he had money, the middle-aged man could start the peaceful life he always wanted. Always keeping this in mind, he crosses the outskirts of the city until he reaches the more remote and forested areas. At one point in the forest, he decides that he will settle there. However, when he returns to the inn and finds Azalea in his room, she warns him that the area is very dangerous. Kenichi acknowledges this and argues that he won't live too far from the city walls, but the girl insists that his desire is strange. In the following days, despite his friend's warnings, the man cuts the grass on the land where he will build his house using a modern lawnmower, also bought from the Shangri-La store, of course. The problem is that it runs on fuel, which is a challenge since there is no fuel around and it's not available in the store. To solve this, the merchant bought mixed gasoline for 2-stroke engines, which is quite expensive after all. There aren't many options besides this, as they don't sell fuel there. Eventually, he builds a road leading to his land, and after that, he cuts down some trees with a chainsaw and an axe. However, after completing this task, he tries to store the huge logs in his item box, but it's not possible due to their size. To solve this, he takes the electric saw and cuts the logs into smaller pieces to finally store them all. Once done, he discovers that the wood only fits if it's no longer than 10 meters. After that, seeing that night is approaching, the man decides to leave the rest of the work for the next day. When the sun rises again, our protagonist resumes the work of building his house. Along with the shovel, he digs around the extensive root of a tree to remove it from the land where the house will be. However, considering that there are still many more to dig, and he's already exhausted just with the first one, he gives up and buys an excavator. The problem is that he soon realizes that he impulsively spent 1.2 million yen. To make matters worse, this vehicle runs on diesel, which is also not sold in this world or in Shangri-La. To not waste the investment, the man buys kerosene for camping equipment. But, before impulsively pouring it into the excavator, he decides to test it in a diesel generator to avoid damaging the vehicle. In the end, After all this work, he manages to start the generator and celebrates his success. When night falls, Kenichi takes a bath in the nearby river, although he knows he needs to do something about the insects before they attack him. At that moment, the man remembers that Azalea recommended an insect-repellent stone sold at the tool shop near the market. When dawn breaks, Kenichi goes there and is greeted by an old man who, according to the merchant himself, looks very much like a wizard. While the attendant comments that he has never seen Kenichi in these lands before, he shares that he came from abroad, and the old man shows interest in buying interesting products from foreign territories. The protagonist asks if the shop has any insect-repellent stones, and promptly, the attendant extends his hand and informs that it costs 3 silver coins, a price the buyer finds too expensive. To haggle, he offers 2 oranges, and the seller reduces the price to 2 silver coins, including the fruits in the deal. After buying the stone, Kenichi sets up his stall and learns from Anama that the old man is a walking encyclopedia in Dahlia. That said, the man notices a wanted poster on the wall where the criminal depicted is Shaga, the leader of the bandits in this area. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, we see that a man is selling the blue-haired girl, and she is placed in a carriage full of girls, but the carriage is attacked by Shaga's gang on the way. Returning to the protagonist, he is having fun with his new diesel-powered toy, pulling out all the roots from the middle of his land, as despite the great effort, all of this is for his dream of a peaceful life in this world, although his bank balance after buying the excavator has melted away. The next day, the merchant goes to Lord Mallow to show the sugar he wants to sell. Kenichi had high expectations for this product, but judging by the man's reaction when tasting the food, it seems he didn't like it much. Mallow states that salt and sugar are indeed precious, but the kingdom holds exclusive rights to them, so he cannot buy from Kenichi. This frustrates the merchant, as he thought it would yield a good profit, but he had another ace up his sleeve, jewels that could be worth a good amount. After the meeting, Primula walks through the city and sees merchants passing through Dahlia, but she knows that the professional who stood out the most is someone she knows, Kenichi Hamada, with his incredible products never seen before in those parts. Upon returning home, Kenichi realizes he earned 15 gold coins from his dealings with the Mallow company, and with that, he can buy the long-dreamed-of wooden stall, which cost an impressive 1.7 million yen. However, as soon as he buys the product at the store, the house is literally thrown to the ground, completely disassembled. He reads the description of this blessed adult-sized Lego and discovers that he will need to assemble it himself, which is why it was so cheap. Not knowing what to do with all that wood, Kenichi sits on top of the pile and laments the work ahead. However, as the saying goes, he who has a friend has everything. And lo and behold, the beastmen he had met went hunting and found our protagonist there. As a way to repay the meal he had prepared for them that day, they helped Kenichi build his house. Meanwhile, the human kept his stall at the market and several weeks passed with his friends helping with the construction. He tells us that it took a little less than a month for the wooden cabin to be completed. After all that work, Kenichi lies down on his new bed to relax, but he is far from finishing everything he has planned for the place where he will live. In fact, he needs to set up electricity, as well as paint the walls and ceiling. Kenichi then tells us that it took him another month to complete these tasks. He built the fences, treated the wood, and prepared his bathroom to recycle waste as fertilizer. He also added a kitchen with a sink and for electricity installed 20 solar panels. Additionally, he built a small stall outside where he could use a drum for bathing, which he filled using a gasoline tank to transport water from the river. Delighted, he enjoys his first bath in the middle of the forest since arriving in this new world. At that moment, he realizes that his life as the ruler of his own domain had officially begun. The next day, he informs Azalea that he is moving to his new home, thanking her for everything she has done and saying goodbye, leaving the young woman surprised and sad. In the late afternoon, Kenichi arrives home and summons his bicycle to take a ride and snap some photos of the forest flowers, but unfortunately, we hit a snag, folks, as an arrow appears out of nowhere and hits the ground in front of the bicycle, causing our protagonist to fall off. To make matters worse, more arrows were shot at him, so he had to run to save his hide until he hid behind a tree trunk. Looking around, he realizes that the beast people were acting aggressively. Not wanting to fall behind, Kenichi summons his slingshot and shoots several times at the attackers, managing to take one down. He then sets off some fireworks to scare the beast people while summoning his tractor to end the chaos. And seeing that huge contraption approaching, the enemies finally flee. After getting rid of the danger, Kenichi tries to understand the motivation behind the attack, but his thoughts are interrupted when he hears the groan of an injured feline in the forest. Quickly, the man goes to the animal and sees it with an arrow stuck in its thigh. Since the animal showed hostility when he approached, Kenichi buys items to protect his arm and neck from a possible bite and removes the arrow from the feline's thigh, which is already too weak to react. He then cleans the wound with saline solution and uses alcohol and ointment to disinfect it, along with some painkillers. After doing this, the man fears the animal might not survive, so he decides to take it home in a wheelbarrow he bought exclusively for this purpose. Since there are probably no veterinarians in this world, Kenichi goes in search of some healing magic at a store, where the merchant says he was lucky to find the lynx, as their pelts are highly valued in the market. Later he returns to Anima, who finds it strange that he rescued an animal. In the midst of this, Miley shows up excited, as according to her, lynxes are messengers of the gods in her culture, and she would love to see the feline. Seeing the injured lynx, the girl is certain that it was the dogmen who did this and swears not to forgive them for it. Kenichi then applies more ointment to the animal's wound, which ends up licking the product, so the merchant decides to buy a collar to prevent this from happening again. Miley asks if Kenichi is a doctor, and he says no, although he knows how to administer first aid. Happy with the care he showed for a sacred animal, the beast woman decides to thank him on behalf of the lynx by hunting some birds, which serve for the barbecue in the late afternoon. After eating, Miley lies down on the bed and announces that she will spend the night there. Kenichi asks about her job, but the girl says she is more concerned about the lynx. The human warns that there is only one bed, so Miley takes the opportunity to suggest they sleep together. Well, this actually happens, and Miley sleeps like a cat on top of the protagonist. Several days later, the lynx was recovering well, so the homeowner started working on the plantation. The problem is that to water the plants, he would have to fetch water from the river every time, which is a big hassle. To fix this, the man thinks about digging a well. At night, things were calm as he slept near the lynx until the image of a huge tree appears, where Kenichi slept in the lap of a woman with purple hair. Then the lynx jumps on the poor man's belly, as if to say it's already fine. To confirm this theory, the feline goes to the door and makes it clear that it wants Kenichi to open it. When he does, the man sees the animal head into the forest and wishes it good luck. In the following days, Kenichi took a few more days off from his stall to tend to his land and finish the well. Lo and behold, a week later, he finally managed to pump water directly into the bath drum. In the midst of this, to his surprise, Primula showed up at his house, marveling at everything around her. She explained that she was worried because Kenichi had disappeared from the market for so long, and Miley had told her about where he was living now. By the way, she asked what that giant metal thing was. Not knowing how to explain the tractor he had acquired, Kenichi lied that it was a familiar he had summoned, and that Primula should keep it a secret that he knew how to use magic. The girl, filled with innocence, confirms that she will keep the secret. Having gotten himself into this mess for free, Kenichi wondered if this woman could use it to blackmail him, although he thought she would never do such a thing, being who she was. As the sun was setting, he asked if it wasn't time for the city gates to close, and Primula confirmed it was. Confused, the man wanted to know where she planned to sleep that night, so she asked if he would let a woman like her sleep in the forest. He pointed out that there was only one bed, but Primula, of course, saw no problem with that, as she was used to sleeping huddled with several men on long shopping trips. Hearing this, Kenichi was left speechless. While the girl asked what that thing with water was, Kenichi explained that it was a bathtub, and Primula got excited about the idea of taking a bath there. Lo and behold, when night fell, she undressed and bathed to the sound of nocturnal birds. But instead of relaxing, she actually got scared and called Kenichi, who was nearby. He approached and suggested she could try bathing another time since she was scared, but she reminded him that the motto of the Mallow Company was, "Never let an opportunity pass." So Kenichi wondered what Primula would do if he were a bad person. But she didn't think a guy who saves animals and feeds beastmen could be bad, and well, she wasn't wrong. At bedtime, Primula came out of the bath and was amazed by the robe the protagonist had offered her. So much so that she even asked him to produce more to sell. Similarly, she also loved the nightgown, and faced with all the fantastic products this man had, she imagined that one day he could become the greatest merchant in all of Dahlia, if not the entire kingdom of Kaden. However, Kenichi mentions that he doesn't want any of that. also saying that he thinks attracting the attention of nobles would only bring him trouble, when all he really wants is enough to live a quiet life. Therefore, Primula promises never to mention her supplier's name to the nobles, and Kenichi thanks her for her consideration, finishing a drawing he was making of her. Later, already lying in her bed, Primula tried to call Kenichi and ask if he was already asleep, while the man pretended to be asleep to keep things calm. Meanwhile, in a remote region, Shaga was being served by the little girl with purple hair who was being used as his servant. Then another man arrives, pushing the child to the ground and handing a bag to the leader, who opens it and sees several gold coins and a letter assigning him a task. When dawn arrived, Kenichi took Primula home and thought about the excuse he would give her father upon arrival. However, once there, Mr. Mallow himself apologized for his daughter's behavior and said he didn't know who she had inherited it from, and the girl promptly assured him that she had inherited it from her father. While discussing business at this meeting, Mallow saw Kenichi's robes and nightgowns, which also included some intimate pieces capable of winning over even the most puritanical man's heart. Mallow was embarrassed to see this business in front of him, while his daughter fell in love with the look. Meanwhile, the maid Margaret arrived with some accounting books the boss had requested. Kenichi commented that it was to be expected from a great merchant to have so many books, but Mallow mentioned that the accounting system had changed, so he was having to rewrite everything because the neighboring empire had invented a system known as double-entry bookkeeping. Hearing these words, an alarm went off in our protagonist Kenichi's head, as this was something that existed in his old world. According to Mallow, this new rule spread quickly thanks to its creator. Then Mallow also showed interest in the bathtub Primula had mentioned, and Kenichi took the opportunity to show a prototype of the product outside. Arriving there, Mallow presented a clay pump, another product that was spreading quickly through the empire. And our protagonist obviously knew very well where the inspiration came from, as it was too much of a coincidence that this was happening right after the start of double-entry bookkeeping. In other words, Kenichi concluded that there was someone from his world in the empire. After that day, Primula began visiting Kenichi more frequently, and one night she informed him that she would be away for a month, starting the next day. Kenichi asked if it wouldn't have been better for her to sleep at home, but Primula wanted to try out that lingerie the man had mentioned at the meeting. He asked if the girl was trying to win someone over, so she admitted that the man was right in front of her, Buddy, and couldn't understand how a young woman like her could be attracted to a man like him. But Primula thought he was amazing, and that's what really mattered. He then tries to dodge the question by asking if her father would approve of such a thing. And she mentions that he would, which left our protagonist confused and made him ask for some time to process the information, as something like this involved a lot of responsibility and was moving from 0 to 100 too quickly. So Primula asked if they could at least share the same bed, and the man agreed, but only to sleep. Later, while she was already asleep, he wondered what Primula saw in a guy like him. The next morning, the woman returned to the city, so Kenichi was left alone at home at least for a few seconds, because that armored warrior had just appeared at his fence. He introduced himself as Norsepaul, and said he was investigating rumors that a suspicious man had started living in the forest, so he had just discovered it was Kenichi. With that said, Norsepaul asked what the hell those devices were, and since he couldn't call them solar panels, Kenichi tried to explain that it was something related to magic, which meant that now another person had to keep the secret that he was, in fact, a mage. In this case, Norsepaul went a step further and asked for a small favor, and Kenichi understood that he had to give up 3 steel ingots to buy his silence. Happy to have material to forge a good sword, the warrior shares that a mage with unique magic had appeared in the empire, capable of producing a large amount of a yellowish sauce called mayonnaise. And by the way, they say this guy defeated a dragon using mayonnaise, and I just wonder how that could be possible. Lo and behold, in the blink of an eye, a month passed, and now we are at the city market, where Kenichi awaited the arrival of Mallow's caravan. Meanwhile, while he was casually working, he overheard some people talking about an attack that had occurred, and well, it seems the trouble involved Primula, as Margaret herself showed up and called our protagonist. As the scene unfolds, we see Kenichi heading to the place where Mr. Mallow was on his knees, begging adventurers to rescue his daughter, but the men refused to face someone like Shaga. Some residents informed the merchants that the guild would need a few more days to organize preparations for an expedition, but he was desperate and couldn't wait. According to reports, Shaga's gang consisted of 50 henchmen, so with those numbers, few dared to confront them directly. The scene shifts perspective perspective to the bandits' hideout, where we see the leader himself throwing Primula into a cell, but he noticed she hadn't shed a single tear, which was expected from the daughter of a great company. Shaga commented that Primula was so beautiful that it made men drool, and soon she would be assigned to a certain nobleman who had a direct interest in her. Back to Malo, he finally reached Kenichi with his plea, begging on his knees for his daughter to be saved. At that moment, the man remembered the moments he had spent with her and impulsively said he would help. As soon as he said this, Kenichi realized he should have thought better, as this was a real situation involving real danger, and he was just a nobody with no combat experience. However, he reasoned that if he did nothing, who knows what could happen to Primula. Besides, he now had Shangri-La, which would be a great help. With this in mind, Kenichi asked for an advance payment for preparations, and Malo handed him 10 million yen without a second thought. After that, Kenichi discovered that Shaga's base was 50 kilometers south of Dahlia, in the ruins of an old mountain castle, which meant he would need a vehicle. After choosing one from the virtual store, he announced to everyone present that he would use summoning magic for something huge, so everyone should make space. With that, Kenichi summoned the truck-kun in the middle of the square and explained that this iron carriage could do everything he commanded without horses, and that he would take everyone who joined the fight, providing the best weapons for those who came aboard. He also mentioned the generous reward for Shaga's head, making this a chance for anyone who wanted to get rich. However, despite the merchant's efforts to convince people to join, it was clear that the crowd was terrified of the bandit and therefore didn't dare to join. For a moment, Kenichi found himself alone in this impossible mission, until he heard a meow in the crowd. It was the lynx with a pigeon in its mouth, who climbed directly onto the truck, showing it was willing to accompany the man who had saved it a month ago. Along with it, another feline appeared to join the group, Mayali, accompanied by her inseparable partners who would also join him. After all, as I've told you before, my dear friends, he who has friends has everything. Shortly after their arrival, Miley received a state-of-the-art composite bow and admitted she never imagined seeing something so well made. The other members of the group also received modern blades, much lighter, practical, and durable than what they were used to. Adding to the group, we see Norspol arriving carrying his latest sword, which was forged with the resources provided by Kenichi. According to the knight, hunting Shaga would be a battle worthy of his sword. Kenichi, though a bit scared by the man's bloodlust, didn't oppose his presence on the truck. Next, the old owner of the tool shop appeared to join the team. Kenichi warned that it was too risky for an old man, but the elderly adventurer proved he wasn't dead yet by summoning a powerful fireball on the ground. Finally, even Anama showed up to climb onto the truck, arguing that it would be cruel to leave her out. Kenichi reminded her it would be a dangerous fight, but she insisted she could at least prepare the food, promising to flee if things got too dangerous. And with that statement, Kenichi pulled her into the vehicle. After that, he asked again who else would join the group to face Shaga, but as he repeated the announcement, the crowd left until no one remained. When Kenichi realized the group was formed, Malo asked to come along, but our protagonist said he should tend to his injuries first and save a big smile for when his daughter returned home safely. With that settled, Kenichi went to the Adventurers Guild and accepted the Shaga mission, also paying a silver coin to register with the guild. After that, he set off with his companions toward the objective, leaving behind the incredulous crowd, as no one imagined such a small group would actually confront the most dangerous bandit in the region. Some even accused the group of running off with Malo's money without completing the mission. But despite the disdain, Kenichi and the others set out to do what they had truly set out to do. After all, as he said, there comes a time when a man must fight, even knowing he might lose. Actually, he thinks some old pirate said that, but Kenichi liked the phrase. Meanwhile, in another scene shift, Primula saw the door to her cell open, and a young girl with purple hair entered with bread to offer her. Seeing the girl's stomach growling, the woman let her eat the food, and though she initially insisted Primula keep the bread, the girl didn't resist much, as she was starving and quickly devoured the bread. Realizing the little one was also a prisoner, Primula said they would escape together as help would surely come. The girl asked if it would be God's help, and Primula said yes, though she was surprised by the question. Back to the rescue group, they continued their journey in the truck-kun until they camped in the late afternoon. Kenichi prepared a soup with vegetables and horned rabbit meat, and everyone was satisfied with the quality of the food. However, the tribe members also seemed interested in the cat food Kenichi bought for the lynx, so the merchant made an exception and let them try it, and in the midst of it, even the old man joined in to taste the cat's food pouch. After the meal, Kenichi explained the strategy he wanted to use, and Norspal and the mage fully agreed. The cats admitted they weren't good at using their brains, so they left that part to the others. Finally, Anama said she would stay at the camp, as she wouldn't be useful in battle, promising to wait for news by the agreed deadline. After that, using a modern low-power communicator, Miley was terrified to discover how the device worked, as she simply heard Kenichi's voice through the device and had no idea how it was possible. But after the initial shock, she informed him they were close to arriving. The mage commented to Kenichi that not even the Empire's sorcerers had magical devices like these, and the merchant asked him to pretend he saw nothing. After that, he got into the truck to head to the castle and said he was counting on Anama, who, in turn, repeated her role before departure, explaining to us that if the group didn't return in a day, she would have to go back to the guild and report the mission's failure. With all that, the truck finally set off to begin the crucial part of the plan. In the middle of the night, Kenichi asked over the communicator what Miley was seeing, and she reported that the wall had watchtowers with guards, but the men were getting drunk. Faced with this, the invading group thought it was the ideal time to attack and prepared for it, while Kenichi received from the cats a kind of battle food similar to a nut. When he bit into it, he felt an extremely bitter taste, and when the effect hit, our protagonist felt completely high, thinking that even though he was about to face death, he simply couldn't stop laughing. As he drove toward the enemy castle, the man felt as if he had embodied Toretto himself, in a Fast and Furious movie where nothing matters but family. Meanwhile, in the castle, the men who could stop Kenichi continued drowning in their drinks around their bonfires. In the castle cells, a somber atmosphere dominated. Outside, Miley aimed her bow and remembered Kenichi's instructions. She would be the first to act to eliminate the guards. In the midst of this, the two gate guards noticed the glow of the truck's headlights approaching and thought it was some kind of monster until arrows struck them, knocking the men down instantly. After that, Miley returned to the truck and they headed to the main gate. As agreed earlier, the old mage took responsibility for dealing with the entrance, so he cast an explosion spell that completely destroyed the gate, ensuring the vehicle's passage, as planned in the pre-attack meeting. The group would attack while the enemies were drinking, as they would be drunk and unarmored. When the truck entered the castle, the allies asked the mage to cast another spell like the first, but he lamented that he wouldn't be able to conjure another due to lack of energy. Even so, the fighters got out of the vehicle and began the attack, catching the bandits completely off guard. Although the cats and Norspal were truly formidable warriors, Kenichi, on the other hand, was completely lost. In the midst of the chaos, a bandit approached him from behind with a knife, but the lynx managed to knock the man down in time, allowing Miley to finish him with an arrow. At that moment, many men emerged from inside the ruins with all their fury, leaving the invaders apprehensive, except Kenichi, who was high from the effects of the dubious nut. As if he were in an unusual Isekai anime, he then summoned his excavator and left the bandit stunned, especially when he turned on the vehicle's spotlight and charged at the men. The cats then took advantage of this moment of hesitation to resume the attack, along with Norspal, who demonstrated great skill by easily defeating opponents with his new sword. In the midst of all this, Kenichi used his excavator mercilessly and knocked down the walls of the cell where Primula was. He then heard screams coming from the other side of the breach, and seeing that intense light coming from the hole, the purple-haired girl thought she was in the presence of God. Meanwhile, Kenichi didn't see Primula anywhere and grew even more worried. At that moment, Shaga appeared holding a woman as a hostage. Thinking they had come to rescue the noblewoman. To show he wasn't joking, the villain tore part of the woman's clothes and said that if he had known things would come to this, he would have had fun with her earlier. In the midst of this, without showing what he was doing, Kenichi asked Miley to notice where he was pointing the laser sight at Shaga, and even without looking, the cat moved her ears to sharpen her senses. Kenichi explained that he would blind the bandit with this light, so the archer would take him down with her bow. And as planned, Kenichi pointed the laser at Shaga's eye, causing him to release Primula. At the same moment, Miley shot the man, with the arrow hitting his shoulder, giving the hostage time to flee into Kenichi's arms. The bandit didn't give up and prepared to throw his sword, but a mysterious wind pushed him, leaving him face to face with Miley, who had her bow aimed at him once more. The cat promised she wouldn't miss this time, and kept her word by hitting the leader's forehead. Meanwhile, Primula kept running until she finally reached Kenichi and hugged him. And perhaps because of the nut's effect, the man felt an overwhelming urge to grab the girl right then and there. but he did everything to restrain his impulses. After the rescue, Nyanji ran back to the camp to inform Anama of the mission's success, and while that happened, Kenichi bought clothes for the women there and arranged for them to take a bath. Additionally, for the purple-haired girl, he gave Premiula scissors to cut the child's hair. Enchanted by the scissors, the woman forgot her condition and asked if she could sell these in her company. But in that slip, she realized her towel had fallen, and she ran off, embarrassed. After the bath and properly dressed, the younger girl introduced herself as Anemone and handed over a letter sent by the nobleman Shega had mentioned, who was responsible for the kidnapping. When the group returned to the camp, Anama cried with relief seeing everyone safe, as it had seemed all was lost. Noticing a child among them, she commented that her own daughter would be the same age, if she were still alive. Kenichi didn't know his friend had a daughter, and she explained that tragically, the girl had died during an epidemic. Shortly after, the freed women went to sleep peacefully after the chaos, while the group planned to return to Dahlia in the morning, remembering they still had the unpleasant task of dealing with the bandits' bodies. But due to exhaustion, Kenichi fell asleep next to Primula and Anemone, and the next day he takes the group back to the city in his truck-con, and upon seeing his daughter step out of the vehicle, Mallow gets emotional and runs to hug her. Even though he is happy, he shows a keen sense for good things, as while hugging his daughter, he comments on the high quality of the shirt she is wearing, leading the two to enthusiastically agree that it could sell well in his store. Kenichi finds it strange that their emotional reunion turns into a business meeting, until Mallow personally thanks him for what he did. Meanwhile, the businessman asks if Kenichi has placed, let's say, the consequence of the mission in his item box, and Kenichi confirms, embarrassed, that he has, emphasizing that his item box has become a true war trench. The day before, while people were eating, Kenichi discovered that the heads of the defeated enemies should be placed separately in the item box as proof of his victory, identifying the wanted individuals. The cats make it clear that this is a common practice among adventurers, so Kenichi needs to get used to it, especially since the heads start to stink after a while, and one must be prepared to endure the stench. Upon hearing this, Kenichi realizes that this world is no joke, and speaking of jokes, his leisurely and peaceful life seems to be going down the drain with this unpleasant news. After that, he gathered all the weapons and armor taken from the bandits, as well as 100 gold coins from the hideout, rugs, drinks, jewels, and lots of junk, and everything obviously ended up in the citizen's item box. After collecting the items, the protagonist offers to take the freed prisoners back to their homeland, but none of them want that, as their families have been killed and they would have nowhere to stay. Because of this, Kenichi suggests that they go to Dahlia with him, as it is a city with many people where they could look for work and try to restart their lives. Primula adds that the Mallow Company could even help them, and this offer convinces the women. Kenichi asks where the village of Anemone is, and she replies that she was born in Urup, and unfortunately, Primula says it is quite far, about 800 kilometers away. Even so, Kenichi offers to take the girl, but she shakes her head negatively. Anama argues that the child must have been sold to reduce the number of mouths to feed, so Kenichi invites her to go to Dahlia with everyone. Thus, the man begins transporting everyone to their respective places, each where they wish to be dropped off. During a conversation among the women on a night of dining at the camp, Anama says that the best quality in a man is his honesty, and Primula, attentive to this, asks if Kenichi would be a good choice. But she emphasizes that no, because men like him don't care about women, also saying that if he finds something he truly wants to do, he will certainly leave a woman behind to pursue his goal. Kenichi hears this part of the conversation with a serious look but remains silent. Finally, the next day, the former prisoners who still had someone reunite with their families. Upon arriving in Dahlia, the guild receptionist panics upon seeing Shaga's head being displayed before her by the cats. Another employee approaches and asks how many heads the adventurers have, and Kenichi replies that there are 52, shocking everyone. Later, as the guild members begin examining the heads, Kenichi steps away to catch his breath, but the mage approaches and comments that the young man's magic is exceptional, as is his item box, which will certainly complicate his life if the nobles find out what he can do. About this, Kenichi asks that if possible he doesn't spill the beans, and if that happens everything will be fine, and if things get ugly, he will leave immediately. At that moment, Norspaul arrives and announces that he is about to see the local lord.
Count Asclepius. Kenichi asks if he will report that nobles were involved with Shaga, and the knight confirms. The inspection of the heads lasts until nightfall, and the total payment is a whopping 861 gold coins. After receiving a sheet with some reward for the service rendered, Anama returns it, feeling she did nothing to deserve it. In fact, she would like to take care of Anemone because of what happened to her son. And Kenichi understands the woman's need to have someone to care for, so he gives her that responsibility. As they leave the guild, Kenichi sees people celebrating in the streets the fact that Shaga has been killed, along with the troop responsible for the successful expedition, like the cats. Speaking of them, since Anama refused the reward, Kenichi divided it among the other 7 members of the group, so each received 123 gold coins. Kenichi goes to the lynx and gives it some food, saying he decided to spend the night in the city since the gates close at that hour. To enjoy the night, he goes to the Azalea Tavern, where a woman sings about someone who opened the gates of hell. Azalea is thrilled to reunite with her friend and asks if it's true that he defeated a band of bandits. Seeing that all the customers are watching the conversation, the man denies it was him and pretends the woman confused the person. Internally, Kenichi thinks that if he told Azalea it was him, she would empty his pockets before he could receive her. Meanwhile, the musician begins singing about a group of catmen led by the lynx, while the tavern owner reminds Kenichi of the promise he made that they would be lovers when he succeeded in business. And Kenichi is perplexed by the woman's intuition working at full throttle, as he never said anything about having earned any money, so he argues that he never made such a promise. In Tia's Faker, the woman shouts that she was just a fling for him, while the customers remind her that she is there to work, as one of them has an empty glass. Meanwhile, Kenichi joins in the fun and simply agrees that he is a no-good adult, heading up to his room and leaving her there. As he climbs the stairs to use his lodging room, the protagonist reflects that it is only a matter of time before the nobles find out about him. In the middle of the night, while Kenichi sleeps, a girl passes by the lynx without issue and walks down the hallway to the room. When Kenichi sees Azalea's face under his blanket, he complains that he is too tired for such things. But the woman just asks to press play as it's time for fun. However, they realize that someone has invaded the room, and we see that who arrived there is Anemone with the lynx. And well, the protagonist was saved by the bell, and who ended up sleeping with him was Anemone and the lynx. The next day, Kenichi thinks Anama might be worried about the child, so he goes to the market to look for her. But the woman is not there. The catmen are hungover and have no idea where the merchant might be, so Kenichi decides to take care of some tasks, like selling equipment taken from the bandits, which earns him 32 gold coins. He then sells Shaga's items to the Malo company for 35 coins, and later, after selling furniture and bows at the old man's tool shop, he earns another 22 gold coins. In total, this earns him 17,800,000 yen. Divided among the 7 members of the expedition team, each receives 12 coins. Kenichi decides to give a portion to Anama and the women who chose to stay in Dahlia. After dining with the catmen, Kenichi takes Anemone back to her home, along with the lynx, where Anama is extremely worried. Later, while having tea, the little girl confesses that she wants to stay with Kenichi. Unfortunately, Anama suggests that she could teach the girl how to run a business so she wouldn't feel alone, as they would live together. But the little girl insists that she wants to live with the man. In the late afternoon, Anama departs in a carriage to the city, and Kenichi has serious doubts about whether this will work out. On the way back home, he asks Anemone why she wants to live with him, and she replies that it's because he feeds her until she is satisfied, something she had mentioned at the end of the first episode. Accepting this, Kenichi serves dinner and enchants the girl with a delicious meal, making him happy to see her appreciate his food. Later, Kenichi is about to take a bath, and the little girl insists that she wants to bathe too, while at bedtime, the child wants to sleep next to him. Kenichi then realizes that suddenly he now has an adoptive daughter, but even though things are going from 0 to 100 very quickly, he decides to just go with the flow. But folks, red flag for trouble, as while father and daughter sleep, a group of hooded figures approaches the backyard of the house. In the next scene, Kenichi has a brief nightmare about his exhausting office days and his past life, waking up gasping in his bed. 15 days later, the knight Norspal is awarded the title of Baron for defeating Shaga, taking over a small territory and starting to recruit people to live there, as well as looking for a wife. Meanwhile, some townspeople have their noble titles revoked for having hired Shaga to kidnap Primula. Ironically, while walking through the city, Anemone sees a dressina being used by a resident, and Kenichi remembers how the Mallows laughed at him when he first presented the project. But the clever ones ended up using the idea. They even apologized for laughing at the foreigner and paid him 5 gold coins for the idea, as, according to Mallow, one of the company's mottos is always to show gratitude for an idea. After the meeting, as they leave the company, the hooded figures continue to follow Kenichi and Anemone. When the review is completed, the group collects the reward and divides it equally once again. Kenichi returns the money he borrowed from Mallow to prepare for the mission, and then distributes a portion among the women he rescued. As for Anama, she accepts at least 1 gold coin, and even gives a fruit as a gift to Anemone. Wherever he goes, Kenichi feels he is being followed, and this becomes even more evident when he notices a hooded man right behind him. Realizing this, he grabs Anemone by the arm and runs, but the hooded figures manage to corner them. The guys have completely lost their shame and are attacking in public, damn it. And with no safe place to go, Kenichi risks an alley and throws wooden boxes along the way to try to buy time. However, at a certain point in the journey, a carriage blocks the alley's exit, leaving him with no way out, so he surrenders. The hooded figures open the carriage door and inform him that their employer wants to have a chat with the merchant. But before entering the vehicle, Kenichi summons some small bombs from his inventory and throws them around, even inside the carriage. Amid the chaos, he manages to create distance and aims his crossbow at the pursuers, who flee in panic. At that moment, Mallow arrives by carriage and asks what happened. Kenichi enters with his adoptive daughter and explains that the whole situation must be the work of some noble, and Mallow believes it was the anti-monarchist faction, suggesting that Kenichi visit Lord Asclepius. But he is still not comfortable with this situation and thinks only that, well, it's time to hit the road. At night, as the foreign merchant heads home, Mallow talks to his daughter about the great debt they owed Kenichi, as they were honored by the city lord for having invented the dressina, even gaining an honorary surname for this achievement. For example, Primula is now called Primula ne Dressina. The next day, alone in her room, she remembers that at first, she only saw Kenichi as a boring middle-aged man, but soon recognized his great talent and personality. Because of this, Primula did everything to get this man's attention, but nothing worked. Still, because he went to save her from the bandits, she was sure he felt something for her, and so she decided to invest even more in Kenichi, as she is certain he feels something for her. Excited, she mentions that she will accompany him in life, and with that runs to his house to open her heart. But upon arriving there, the blow was strong, leaving her only to cry upon seeing that his house simply disappeared. At this, she remembers Anama's words about Kenichi being someone who doesn't settle down because of a woman. The scene then changes, and we see that Kenichi, Anemone, and the Lynx are on a motorcycle wandering around, and on the way, he meets Fuyu, and the two then have a chat. Fuyu asks who the girl and the Lynx are, and our protagonist just mentally notes how he left home storing everything, questioning if Anemone wanted to come along or stay with Anima, and she confirming that she wants to go with him. Before leaving, the Lynx shows up there, and he says goodbye. But to his surprise, the Lynx followed him and decided to stay with him too. Reflecting on all this, the protagonist just mentioned to Fuyu that they are his family, leaving both Anemone and the Lynx happy with the statement. He then tells Fuyu that he is embarking on a journey with no set destination with his family in search of the long-dreamed-of peaceful life. Seeking to settle in a new location, the group takes a break to eat, and Kenichi prepares a freshly caught fish for the meal. At the moment, they are 100 kilometers from Dahlia and about 6 kilometers from the next town called Astrantia. After finishing the fishbowl soup, the man serves his family and thinks to himself that this is indeed the life he has always wanted. During lunch, in a moment of reflection, Kenichi remembers that Anemone mentioned being 12 years old, but she seems very small for her age. After eating, he launches a drone and discovers that the river where they stopped flows into a lake, and it seems that Astrantia lies beyond that lake, so he invites the girl to look for a spot with a good view there. Upon arriving, the child and the Lynx have fun in the water, and while they play, Anemone remembers that she always prayed to God to save her. She recalls that throughout her difficult journey, she even shed some tears. After all, she is just a child. However, now she is on a new adventure with Kenichi, whom she mentions as her god and savior. After a great trip to the lake, Kenichi asks Anemone what she thinks about living there, and the girl gets excited about the idea. Thus, he conjures his wooden house once again and prepares for a new life. Watching the child lovingly hug the Lynx, Our protagonist realizes that he never gave the feline a name and suggests names like Kuro, Black, Kuru, and several others, but none please. Thinking better, he considers the animal's fur and decides on Velvet, which could be affectionately called Vel, and both like the suggestion very much. At night, the child writes her own name without needing help, and Kenichi celebrates her progress in reading and writing. Thus, he checks and discovers that the Shangri-La store doesn't sell diesel, so he uses kerosene for now. But he would love to find a cheaper fuel. And since he once saw on TV something about biodiesel made from used cooking oil, he buys some books to study the subject. Lying in his bed, researching the method, Kenichi sees Anemone enter his room and take an interest in the reading, even without understanding. Kenichi explains that the book is not in the language of this country, which means the girl couldn't read it. But she says she could learn the language spoken in the man's country. With that, Kenichi buys a copy of The Little Mermaid and allows the girl to learn some Japanese words on her own. The next day, while removing the camouflage from his solar panel since it was sunny, Kenichi hears a noise in the bushes and, fearing it might be a monster, quickly buys a crossbow to deal with the situation. However, Miley emerges from the bushes with a bow on her back and shouts that she has finally found her friend. She complains about being left behind and having had a hard time following the trail of the lynx in the cart. Then Miley enters the wooden house and Anemone is happy to see her friend. And well, Kenichi informs her that the Catwoman will live with them from now on. At lunch, Kenichi asks if Dahlia is still the same since he left, and the Catwoman says that Norseball proposed to Primula, while Kenichi thinks that this is a typical status marriage, but admits that he would have liked to attend the ceremony. Later, the residents of the house take a bath to clean up and relax, and Miley discovers the wonders of a hairdryer, which, in her case, works for her entire body. The next day, she and Anemone are looking at the book The Little Mermaid, and the cat finds the illustrations very explanatory, mentioning that she can understand even without knowing how to read. Hearing the conversation, Kenichi realizes that even without knowing how to read, if it's an illustrated book, people can understand the story. So, he thinks it might be a good idea to produce illustrated books about fairy tales from his world, but first decides to ask the girls if there are any in their world. Immediately, Miley mentions the Ancient Queen and the Holy Knight, for example. Anemone adds the tale of the forest elf, and Kenichi shows more interest in the latter, so he asks the little girl to tell the story so he can write it down. Anemone tells the story of an elf who lived in a forest and fell in love with a human prince. But all the people from both races were against this union, and the elf almost dies in a conflict that starts because of this. However, thanks to the power of the fairies, she escapes to a safe place, and the two live happily ever after deep in the forest. After writing down each part of the story, Kenichi buys a mimeograph printing kit and puts his plan into action to create books based on local tales, leaving Anemone and Miley amazed to see before them a finished book with a story they've heard all their lives, something completely new for both. Suddenly, Kenichi notices a canoe approaching the riverbank with a human and a beastman inside. Quickly, he tells the girls to go inside the house as there are people approaching, and it's unknown if they pose any threat. To defend his territory, Kenichi approaches the intruders with his crossbow in hand, but the man in the canoe explains that they are residents of Santanka, the village on the other side of the lake. Kenichi asks if there is any law preventing him from living there or something like that, and the man replies that living there isn't a problem, as long as the person is good. But since they don't know if he is a bandit or something, they came to check. Additionally, he observes that the intruder seems well armed, so Kenichi explains that he is a merchant who had trouble in his city and needed to flee. At that moment, Velvet comes to caress his owner, and the Beastman is surprised to see such a large lynx so comfortable with a human, which means it's impossible for him to be a bad person. Thus, the human in the canoe trusts his companion's word, and introduces himself as Crouton, while the Beastman is called Nyanyas. Then, Kenichi takes the two to the backyard of his house, where Crouton says that since he has worked for the kingdom of Astrantia, he ends up taking care of these matters. Nyanyas sees the girls inside the house and comments to his partner that there don't seem to be any problems around here, so the human agrees and apologizes for the inconvenience. Putting that aside, he sees the books produced by Kenichi and asks if they are for sale. Later, during a meal, Miley asks if the homeowner has already sold his books, and he replies that Crouton has a daughter Anemone's age. After the meal, while Anemone stays home reading, Kenichi goes into the forest and stores medicinal plants in his inventory. Miley arrives and hugs the man from behind, whispering that Anemone isn't around. The human asks if she's in heat or something for acting this way, but she replies that it's not about that. And well, the scene changes, and in the following days, Kenichi builds an external shed and begins synthesizing biodiesel inside. Wearing his hazardous materials protective suit, he feels so hot that he occasionally needs to throw everything off and jump into the lake to cool down. It was dangerous work involving a deadly toxin. But if successful, Kenichi could create a much cheaper fuel. On one hand, expectations were high, and he was very focused on this, but on the other hand, there's a side effect. Anemone is feeling a bit neglected and bored. Kenichi then decides to break the ice and approaches the child, inviting her to make a new illustrated book. Without a response, he mentions that he is thinking of going to Astrantia and invites her. At that moment, Miley appears and accepts the invitation even though she wasn't invited. So Anemone decides to join. Since Miley has been to this city many times, she would be responsible for showing the way, while Kenichi and Anemone ride the motorcycle. Since they couldn't take the direct road, they had to make a 10-kilometer detour. Upon arriving, Kenichi goes to the local adventurers guild and informs them that he wants to register with the guild. The woman asks for identification, so he shows the item that proves he is registered with the merchants guild and the adventurers guild in Dahlia. Miley, also wanting to register there, says she is only registered with the Adventurers Guild in Dahlia. After evaluating the man's identification, the receptionist apologizes upon discovering that she is speaking to Kenichi, the one who defeated the feared Shaga, but he asks the woman not to speak loudly to maintain his privacy. In the middle of this, Anemone shouts that Kenichi is the strongest god there is, leaving the man even more embarrassed. In any case, the receptionist says that the cost to register with the guild is 1 silver coin. After registering, the group goes to Astrantia street market to grab a bite, and Kenichi reflects that in this world, it's common to just boil vegetables and meats and put them in soup without a base broth, so he understands why Anemone and Miley are making such faces. As he realizes that after eating seasoned food, it's hard to go back to this type of meal. Knowing this, he buys a bonito fish broth for the two to remind them what real food tastes like. In the middle of this, he notices 2 suspicious men looking for someone while Crouton enters a dark alley with his daughter. Putting that aside for a moment, he continues his stroll through the market with the girls until they find a tool shop called Snowflake. Miley mentions that it belongs to an old mage, and sensing the smell of treasures, the man decides to enter. Inside, the mage is at the counter and welcomes the customers while commenting that she has never seen him around before. Realizing this, he almost calls her the same again when asking about a tool but corrects himself before repeating the mistake. Then the shopkeeper demonstrates the tool's function by pouring water into one container and wine into another. After a reaction from the tool, the 2 liquids are poured separately into 2 mugs. Kenichi tastes the wine and notices that the alcohol content has strangely increased. After a more detailed inspection, he asks if the tool separates certain substances from what is placed on the front plate. The mage replies that it is a magical item that extracts the liquid placed on the front plate and discards the rest through the bottom. At that moment, Kenichi realizes that he can produce biodiesel without chemicals if he uses this device, so he buys the item for 5 gold coins. Then Anemone appears with a grimoire in her hand, and Kenichi gets excited, asking if it allows one to use magic by reading. Surprised by the man's behavior, the lady explains that this won't be possible for someone without magical power. But Kenichi is willing to take the risk and buys the book for 10 gold coins. He was eager to take it home, but the mage explains that grimoires need to be registered first, so the buyer must return in a week. As they leave the store, they encounter Nyanyas on the way, but the beast is in a hurry and runs off with a bag on his back. With that, Kenichi becomes worried and feels that he should go home as quickly as possible. By the way, in some alley, he sees those 2 suspicious men from the market telling each other that they found who they were looking for. Shortly after, a child screams and Kenichi sees Crouton with his daughter being threatened by armed bandits. Hesitating to get involved for a moment, Kenichi knows he hates getting into trouble, but when Anemone asks if he isn't going to do something, he realizes he has no way out at that moment. So, he asks Miley to take care of the child, but if the situation worsens, she should lend a hand. Thus the man buys a medieval plague doctor mask from the online store and enters the fray. As he approaches the bandits, he uses the item to scare them, claiming to be a magician full of tricks. He grabs the fireworks and starts setting them off around, saying that they will explode inside them if they don't leave, and well, the men flee. After that, Nyanyas arrives and apologizes for only showing up now, explaining that he fell into the bandits' trap and ended up separated from his friend and daughter. Later, Crouton explains that the armed men were from the Spice Union, and Kenichi remembers that this union in Dahlia is called Bacopa. Crouton adds that when he worked for the kingdom, he arrested several of them, which marked him as a target. Then he explains to his daughter that this was the man who sold him the storybook, and the girl thanks him excitedly, having loved the story. Anemone shares that she helped make the book and asks to create a new story with Crouton's daughter, who shows great interest in doing so. Thus, the two introduce themselves and become friends, something that pleases Kenichi, as it's always good to see a child making their first friend of the same age. A few days later, Anemone eagerly awaits Mary's arrival, who approaches by canoe with her parents and Nyanyas for a visit. Kenichi had prepared a feast for the arrival of the new friends, who are amazed by the spices the foreigner used in his food. Afterward, they spend the whole day having fun, especially the children, until the late afternoon arrives, along with the time to leave. After that, Mary and Anemone start visiting each other every day, and Kenichi also gets to know the village of Santanka, where Crouton's daughter lives with her family. The two start working on an illustrated story of Cinderella until one day something happens. Almost unable to breathe, Crouton arrives at Kenichi's house with a huge bag full of coins, claiming that it's all his savings. According to him, Mary is suffering from a high fever, saying that this is a disease from this region and that when children catch it, they usually don't last even a night. Hearing this, Anemone desperately hugs her father, and Miley remembers that the mage from Astrantia might be able to use some healing spell. Unfortunately, Crouton laments not having the money to request such a service. So first, Kenichi buys medicine to reduce the fever and sends Crouton back to his village with all the money, promising that he will be there soon. With that done, he leaves Miley to take care of Anemone and sets off on his motorcycle. At night, in the village of Santanka, the mage says that Mary has chicory fever, which is very difficult to cure with magic. According to her, a white flower called chicory blooms deep in the forest, at the spring that is the source of the river that passes through the village, and this fever can only be treated with its seeds. Thus, Kenichi, Crouton, and Nyanyas decide to set out in search of the cure, agreeing to return by the next morning at the latest. However, as soon as the men leave, we see that those wretched bandits from the city have found Crouton's house and are lurking around. With that, the episode ends, and I don't know, I'm left with the feeling that Nyanyas is mixed up in something shady. There was that moment when he runs off with a bag full of stuff. Now he shows up to help Crouton. Who's to say he didn't bring the bandits there and, I don't know, sold out his friend for some reason? Is this a real theory or a bust? We'll find out the answer to this and other things in the next episode.